we see a NATO that is more realistic about the threat that they perceive, they all face with Russia than at any point, even at the height of the Cold War. This is really something that's going on over there, and all because of the Russian invasion into Ukraine.
Hungary's parliament's approved a bill to allow Sweden to join the military alliance after years of delay. The vote, which took place in Budapest today, follows Friday's meeting between the Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson and his Hungarian counterpart Viktor Orban, in which they agreed to put aside their differences, saying they were prepared to die for each other. Speaking after the vote in Budapest today, the Swedish Prime Minister called it an historic day. This is the moment the Hungarian Parliament ratified Sweden's NATO bid.
Az országgyűlés a törvényjavaslatot 188 igen, 6 nem szavazattal.
Okay, let's get up to date with what this means with Colonel Brendan Kearney, the military affairs analyst and former chief of staff for the US Marine Corps forces in Europe, which worked with NATO. Brendan, good evening to you.
Good evening, Rick. Good to talk to you.
Always good to speak to you, Brendan. So Sweden will become the newest member of NATO, but this has taken a long time to actually make it happen.
It has. And you know, when the Swedes and the Finns here a couple of years ago, right after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, announced their desire to join, obviously Vladimir Putin made a lot of noise about it, and both the Turks and the Hungarians were the leaders of the opposition. But time has gone by. I think politics heals as it tends to over time. And we have today's result with Sweden now becoming member number 32 in NATO.
I suppose it's important to note, though, that Viktor Orban is a man who probably openly, you could say, plays the field as the Hungarian leader, because he is very close with the Russian leader, President Putin, as well, isn't he?
Rick, you're exactly right. He plays his cards close to his vest, and you have to admire him. What he is doing is what he perceives is best for Hungary. And the Hungarians have got a historical tie to a degree with Russia, but they also have a long memory of Russia putting down that rebellion way back around 1956. So that plays a role in this too.
Brendan, what does this mean that Sweden joins NATO? What does it mean in practical terms for the military alliance? Does it make them stronger? Does it give them more weapons, more support? Or is it just simply a numbers game?
Well, it does all of those things, Rick. The Swedes have historically had an extraordinarily well-trained and well-equipped military, and that's what they're bringing to it. They're taking decades of non-alignment, purposeful non-alignment on their part, really with an anticipation of not wanting to antagonize the Russian bear. And they've set that aside. They have a very, very strong feeling that Russia is acting as an aggressor in a manner that will continue here, even if Ukraine was to solve itself. They're worried, and they need an alliance that is extraordinarily strong, and that's what they've done. They have voted to go ahead and take on the antipathy of the Russians and throw their lot in with NATO. And this gives NATO that much more in terms of people, equipment, expertise. It's a real plus for NATO.
NATO, though, of course, has been widely discussed by President Trump as being inadequate when it comes to funding from the European side. You know, he's criticised many European countries for not committing 2% of what they spend overall on defence. How much could it change under a Trump presidency?
You know, quite honestly, I don't think it's going to change very much. I think, Trump is going to go ahead and continue to posture and make the loud noises that he does, because that's Trump. I think, and listen, there's nothing wrong. A lot of us have, when I was on active duty, with my NATO counterparts there in Europe, I would express our frustration, America's frustration, that these commitments, and again, it's NATO's commitments that these countries are
Yeah.
failing to meet. They're important. They're important to the United States, to the American public, and to our politicians, the Congress of the United States. And I would strongly encourage them to meet those commitments. And it's just one of those things that he's going to continue to make noise. There's no doubt about that. And if it wasn't over the funding, it would be over something else. That's the nature of the guy. But it is important. We need a strong NATO. The stronger NATO is, the greater the chance is that Russia will do nothing against any of the countries in NATO.
Trump, though, he didn't hold back when he was talking about the people committing to these numbers. But, NATO, of course, has fired back itself, saying a record 18 member countries are set to meet the Defence Alliance's target of spending 2% of their economic output on defence this year. So there is a suggestion here that countries are beginning to take this far more seriously because of what's gone on in Ukraine, Brendan, and they are upping their game here.
Yes, they are. I agree with you. I agree. I think we see a NATO that is more realistic about the threat that they perceive, they all face with Russia than at any point, even at the height of the Cold War. This is really something that's going on over there, and all because of the Russian invasion into Ukraine. What Putin has done is he provided NATO with a degree of relevance that, quite frankly, there prior to that invasion, NATO was really kind of struggling with a shared sense of purpose. There's no struggle with that now. There's a fear that there has to be a common defense against Russia. And the way to do that is have a strong NATO. And thankfully, there are countries over there that are meeting their requirements. Some are exceeding it. And that's great. That's the way it should be. That we want to avoid war. We want to avoid the conflict there between Russia and the rest of Europe. So this is the best way to do it.
We've heard, haven't we, in the last few weeks about the gains that Russian troops have been making on the ground in Ukraine, and the UK in the last couple of weeks has, recommitted to providing Ukraine with weapons and providing them with support, as of many other countries. But what is going to turn this war around, do you think, Brendan? Is it simply a case of spending and giving Ukraine more ammunition, more vehicles, more equipment in order to push back against the Russians?
Well, it's going to have to be some combination of that, and obviously that chance, that luck that comes with the military that strives to achieve it. And the Russians have not striven to achieve any degree of excellence over there. They're still making the same mistakes that they made 2 years ago in terms of command and control, logistics. The leadership is still abysmal. And there doesn't seem to be a willingness on the part of the Russian military to go ahead and really change the way they perform. And I mean in many respects, we have to thank God for that, the gods of war, because what it is doing is allowing the Ukrainians to conduct an absolutely brilliant defense, a really, really good offensive effort last year, but they're going to have to pick up on that. But in order to do that, they're going to have the ammunition and the equipments to pull this type of thing off. And they've, a lot of these things, Rick, that were promised 6 months ago are only now showing up on the battlefield. So this it's an awfully long lead time for many of these things to occur. And again, these F-16s that were promised, we really haven't seen them show up. And the M1A1 tanks that the United States provided are in Europe and have made a show on the battlefield, but then have not shown up at the numbers that the U.S. has committed to. So I think this is going to go on for a while longer, sadly.
Brendan, before I let you go, we've had this breaking news in the last half an hour that Joe Biden says he hopes to have a ceasefire in the Gaza conflict by the 4th of March. That's next week. What do we think has created this breakthrough? It must be the release of hostages, you would have thought.
I think so. I think there's I think the Arab world is putting an awful lot of pressure on Hamas and also indirectly on Hezbollah to do something. They want this, the entire thing, this entire situation from the 7th of October has been an embarrassment to the Arab world, because what they do is they see this criminal organization, and that's what Hamas is. Make no mistake about that. It is a criminal terrorist organization that the Arab world is embarrassed by. They don't want anything to do with them. You notice really when you get right down to it, there are no countries over there. No Arab countries are offering to take these refugees. None, not one. So this is they want to see the bloodshed ended, and I think what they're doing is they're putting pressure on the Arabs, even the Qataris, and of course that's where the Hamas's political leadership is located. So this is that, and the Israelis I think are showing a little bit of flexibility, not a whole lot, but they'd like to get these. They would love to get these hostages back. It's it really is. It's a crime against humanity what's going on many, many levels, to include the deaths of all these innocents in the Gaza. So I hope this takes place, and I hope some calmer heads can get involved in this thing, and maybe this ceasefire can be followed by a much longer ceasefire, a cessation of hostilities altogether.
Brendan, thanks so much for your time. Always good to speak to you. Thank you.
Same here, Rick. Talk to you soon.
Colonel Brendan Kearney there, military affairs analyst and former chief of staff for the US Marine Corps forces in Europe.